Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling Julian Jaynes and his theory of the bicameral mind.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, maybe even a radical idea.
Definitely radical.
But we're going to try to break it down. Using Jaynes' own book
The Origin of Consciousness.
in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. So get ready.
Yeah, strap in.
Because this one might just turn your understanding of, well, of being human upside down.
Totally.
Jaynes basically says that before around 1000 BC, humans weren't conscious.
As in not conscious like we are now.
Right, not in the way we think of it today. Instead, they had this bicameral mind.
Where the right side of the brain would, like, talk to the left side.
And this would be experienced as hearing voices.
Guiding their actions, making decisions.
Wild stuff, right?
Totally wild. But Jaynes doesn't just, throw this idea out there.
No.
He brings in evidence from history, language, even psychology.
Okay, so let's start with this idea that consciousness isn't what we think it is.
Right, like what did Jaynes mean by that?
Yeah, what did he mean?
Well, he's saying that consciousness, that feeling of having an inner self, and
Right.
making our own choices, it's not as crucial as we think. For daily life, he points out we do tons of stuff automatically without even thinking,
Yeah, that's true.
like learning new things, following our routines, even reacting to stuff.
I get that. I don't consciously think about how to walk anymore or ride a bike.
Right, exactly. And Jaynes takes it even further. He's got these examples like a coin toss experiment,
Oh, I read about that.
where people learn patterns better when they're not trying to figure them out.
Weird.
It is weird.
Hmm.
Or think about, like, pairing music with a meal,
Okay.
a delicious meal.
Yeah.
That can make you like the music more later on,
Oh.
but only if you weren't aware of the pairing while it was happening.
So consciously thinking about it messes it up.
Exactly. Like our brains are doing all this amazing stuff
Yeah.
in the background, and we don't even know.
Okay, so how does this all connect back to the bicameral mind?
Well, Jaynes uses the Iliad,
The epic Greek poem about the Trojan War.
yes, as like a prime example of the bicameral mind in action.
And his point is,
That there are no words for consciousness or introspection.
you mean like words for mind or soul?
Yeah. Or even just the idea of reflecting on your own thoughts, your feelings. Instead, they use words that describe like physical sensations,
Okay.
impulses. So psyche, for example.
Yeah.
It often meant stuff like blood or breath,
Hmm.
not a separate soul.
Interesting. So how did people in the Iliad, how did they make decisions then? Or understand their experiences?
Jaynes says they relied on those voices, the right hemisphere talking to the left.
Yeah, okay.
They'd hear these as like auditory hallucinations, and they'd interpret them as the voices of gods.
Ah, that's where we get the whole god thing, like
Mm.
Achilles taking orders from the gods.
Exactly. No inner conflict.
Yeah.
Not like us today. They just acted on what they heard, believing it was, divine guidance.
Okay, so if this bicameral mind was so common, how did it break down? What happened?
Well, Jaynes points to this period around 1000 BC.
Okay.
Super intense change. Huge social upheavals, migrations.
Lots of chaos.
Tons of chaos, yeah. Society's collapsing. Basically, everything's falling apart.
And that led to consciousness.
That's Jaynes' theory.
Mm,
He says that as those voices went silent, humans, well, they had to adapt,
right.
had to find new ways of making sense of the world, making choices.
It's like being thrown in the deep end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And having to learn to swim.
Wow.
And that struggle, figuring things out on their own,
Yeah.
that's what spurred consciousness
Yeah.
as we know it.
That's a huge shift. But why would the voices go silent? What could cause that?
Well, Jaynes has a few ideas, and it's probably a bunch of factors altogether.
Like what?
Cultural shifts, for sure. The impact of literacy, the way authority was changing, all that could disrupted things.
Literacy is an interesting one. I can see how the written word, like laws written down
Mm-hmm.
or commandments, that could start to challenge the authority of those immediate voices.
Absolutely. And as people start relying more on written stuff, on abstract concepts,
Yeah.
it might have shifted their focus inward,
Yeah.
leading to that inner dialogue, self-awareness.
Which we link to consciousness.
Exactly.
So this isn't just about the Iliad then, right? Jaynes found this in other civilizations too.
Oh, yeah. He looked at tons of cultures. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Americas, the Andes,
Wow.
and he found common patterns, despite all the differences.
Ah,
He talks about archaeological evidence,
right.
like God houses.
Elaborate god houses, yeah.
Right. And burial practices where they treated the dead like they were still living.
Like mummification and stuff.
Yeah. And the prevalence of idols, which some people think might have been used with hallucinogens.
Whoa, using drugs to connect with the gods.
Yeah, to make the voices stronger, more vivid. It's wild, right?
It's a lot to take in.
For sure. But it shows how different their religious experiences must have been.
So how did this shift to consciousness affect how people thought about themselves?
Oh, that's a great question. We'll dive into that next time.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back.
This is getting good.
Wow, my mind is definitely buzzing after all that.
Yeah, it really is.
It's amazing to think like something like that could have shaped, well, everything, you know?
It makes you look at history differently.
For sure.
And the implications are just huge.
Like imagine trying to understand, civilization, building pyramids and temples.
Right.
Through that lens.
That's a whole other way of looking at things.
It's hard to grasp the idea that people might not have had those same struggles.
Yeah.
Internal struggles or doubt.
Exactly. Jaynes says that in a bicameral society, obedience wasn't really a choice or even a force. It was the way things were. People acted based on what they heard.
Those commands.
Yeah, the gods, which often came through their leaders.
So like that level of compliance,
right?
Maybe that explains how they did such incredible things.
I think so. The engineering, the social organization.
Like everyone working together in this like collective flow.
Totally. Guided by that shared purpose.
And that sense of, like divine purpose.
Right.
Maybe that took away the conflict, the resistance that we have today.
Which can definitely hinder big projects.
So the bicameral mind, as limited as it might seem, could have been an advantage in some ways.
Absolutely. I mean, building a pyramid is a lot easier when you don't have people debating every decision.
Right. Or questioning the pharaoh.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, Jaynes uses specific examples to back this up. He points to the archaeological evidence.
Okay.
Like the god houses, those elaborate temples.
I can see how those would reinforce the belief.
Yeah, in the gods.
Yes.
Like the architecture itself was speaking to them.
To the bicameral mind.
Exactly. And then there's the burial practices. The tombs, filled with all the riches, provisions.
Yeah.
That suggests death wasn't the end, but a transition to another place where they still existed.
Potentially, with those voices still guiding them.
It is a different way of thinking about death.
Than we have today.
Absolutely. And then there are the idols.
Okay.
Now, we don't know for sure what they were all for.
Right.
But Jaynes thinks some might have been used with hallucinogenic substances.
To enhance the experience.
Yeah, to make those voices stronger, more real.
Whoa. So they were using drugs to connect with the divine.
It's a possibility. I mean, psychoactive substances have been used in rituals for a long time.
That's true.
And it's definitely possible that some cultures use them to talk to their gods.
To amplify what they were already hearing.
Makes you think about those religious experiences in a whole new light.
It does. Okay, so we've got all this evidence for the bicameral mind in those ancient societies. But we also know it eventually broke down. Consciousness emerged. So what does Jaynes say about that transition?
He describes it as a really turbulent time, filled with confusion, anxiety.
Yeah.
Like this longing for the old way, for the certainty of the bicameral era. Imagine the voices are just gone.
That's got to be terrifying.
Right. Like you're suddenly on your own, having to make decisions without that guidance.
And Jaynes, he actually compares this to schizophrenia.
He does.
Because they hear voices too, right?
Yeah. But we have to be careful here. It's a sensitive topic.
Of course.
Schizophrenia is a serious mental illness.
Right.
And while there might be like some surface similarities, we got to approach this with caution.
Definitely.
With respect for those who experience it.
But I can see how the breakdown, losing that guidance, could trigger similar feelings, disorientation, anxiety.
Exactly. Jaynes is saying both involve this disruption in how information's processed in the brain, whether it's on a societal level with consciousness emerging or on an individual level with certain conditions.
It's a fascinating comparison, but kind of unsettling too.
It is.
Shows how fragile our mental frameworks are.
Totally. And it brings us back to that idea we talked about earlier, the cognitive imperative.
Right, that human need.
Yeah.
For authorization.
Yeah, for direction.
Yeah.
For guidance.
So when the bicameral mind went away, we had to find new ways to meet that need.
Exactly. Jaynes says this search took many forms.
Okay.
New religious beliefs, secular authorities, even philosophical and scientific inquiries.
So we replaced the gods with kings, priests, philosophers, scientists.
It's simplified, but yeah, it gets the point across.
We went from absolute commands to a more complex system.
For sure. A lot more nuanced.
But that need for guidance, that yearning for purpose, it's still there.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental.
It makes you wonder how that's playing out today, you know?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, is it driving our politics, social structures, our personal search for meaning?
It's something to think about. A really profound question.
So we've gone from ancient civilizations to now.
Yeah.
And it seems like this bicameral mind idea, well, it helps us understand human behavior.
Across time and cultures.
But I'm still curious about those present-day things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Hypnosis, poetry, music. How do those fit into all this?
That's where we're going next. Jaynes thinks those might be leftovers, you know. Echoes of that old way of thinking, like glimpses into how it worked.
Okay, so we've talked about how ancient civilizations might have had this bicameral mind.
Right.
And that it eventually gave way to consciousness.
Like we have today.
But you were saying there might still be, like, traces of it?
Oh, I think so.
In the modern world?
Yeah.
You mentioned hypnosis, poetry, music.
Right, things you wouldn't normally think of as, like, ancient ways of thinking.
Exactly.
It's one of the most fascinating parts of Jaynes' theory, in my opinion. He's suggesting that those things might be like little windows.
Into how the bicameral mind worked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like glimpses of that old mentality.
Okay, let's start with hypnosis.
Okay.
It's always seemed kind of, I don't know, mysterious.
Yeah, it is.
How does Jaynes connect that to the bicameral mind?
He talks about how the process itself, you know,
Okay.
hypnosis, it shares some similarities with the bicameral mind.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it. You narrow your focus.
Yeah.
You're listening to the hypnotist's voice.
Yeah.
And you surrender to their suggestions.
So the hypnotist is like taking the place of those divine voices.
Exactly. Guiding your thoughts, your actions.
And being susceptible to suggestions. Experiencing things differently, like altered perceptions.
Yeah, that could be a leftover from that older way of thinking.
Yeah.
Where those commands were just accepted as reality.
So even though we're conscious, you know, during hypnosis,
right,
there's still that element of giving up control.
Yeah.
Letting something else guide you.
Like in the bicameral mind.
Wow.
It's not a perfect match, obviously, but it's a fascinating way to look at it.
It is. It's like our minds can still, I don't know, access those older ways of thinking.
Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty wild. Okay, what about poetry and music? How do they fit in?
Jaynes thinks those art forms, you know, with their rhythms, their ability to evoke emotions, create imagery, they might actually echo how how the gods talk to us.
Our gods.
Yeah, think about how poetry can transport you, make you feel things so deeply. Could that be like a legacy of the right hemisphere's voice?
Yeah.
You know, that source of hallucinations?
Whoa. So those ancient voices, the ones they thought were divine,
right,
maybe they found a new way to express themselves.
Through art, through language and sound.
It's like chill. It gives me chill. It's like we're tapping into something ancient.
Primal.
When we like really connect with a poem or music that moves us.
It's about the power of art.
Yeah.
To connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, to tap into emotions and experiences that go beyond everyday consciousness.
It's a lot to think about. This whole bicameral mind idea, it's incredible.
It is.
It makes you question everything.
It does. About history, consciousness, who we are.
Jaynes' work, it's challenging.
Yeah, it is.
But that's what makes it so fascinating.
It forces you to think differently.
Yeah.
To consider new explanations.
For how our minds work. And how we became, well, us.
Absolutely.
It's like we're still figuring out the human mind.
There's still so much we don't know.
And that's exciting. There's always more to discover.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've reached my brain capacity for today.
Yeah, it's a lot of process.
If our listeners wanna explore this more, what should they check out?
Definitely Jaynes' book, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind.
It's a dense book.
It is.
But worth it.
Oh, totally.
And as always, you know, Think for yourselves. Draw your own conclusions.
Exactly. Be critical. Stay curious.
Keep those minds open. Well, thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the bicameral mind.
That was a good one.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open to new possibilities.